Hi, everyone. This is Traci Fenton, founder of WorldBlu. And now we're going to talk about the #1 driver of leadership success, which is your self-worth. In my previous talk on freedom-centered leadership, I touched on how one of the core attributes of a freedom-centered leader is love, or specifically self-worth. In this talk, I want to explore with you the impact our level of self-worth has on the way we lead ourselves and others. I've been teaching leadership to leaders in over 65 countries for almost 25 years now, and I can tell you that almost every single leadership problem that leaders face, from poor communication skills to an inability to receive feedback well, from bullying and racist behavior to fiefdoms, drama, and backstabbing, are all symptoms of low self-worth. When you solve the self-worth problem, you solve many of the fear-based leadership problems you're seeing in others and possibly yourself right now. So, what is your level of self-worth? What about the level of self-worth of the 5 people with whom you work the most? What about the level of self-worth of your spouse, your partner, and even your children? How do you think their level of self-worth is impacting your interactions? Also, are you the kind of freedom-centered leader who is increasing the level of self-worth in others, or are you pulling others down? We're going to be exploring the answers to these questions and more in this talk today. But first, how exactly does our level of self-worth impact our ability to be an effective freedom-centered leader rather than fear-based leader? First, a reminder of what self-worth is. Self-worth is loving yourself because you know your inherent, unchanging, and inestimable worth, regardless of external conditions, human opinions, or how you were raised, or where you live, how many degrees you have or don't have, what your title is or isn't, or any other circumstance. Self-worth is knowing and believing in your innate and unchanging value, despite your imperfections. It doesn't mean you think you're perfect or have nothing to improve upon. High self-worth leaders are constantly growing and improving. But your value, your very worth, is independent of what you're still working on. Your worth doesn't have to be earned, it just is. Also, self-worth is not self-confidence or even self-esteem. They are different. I have met many people who act self-confidently, but who do not have high self-worth. High self-confidence can sometimes, but not always, be a cover for low self-worth. A fear-based leader can appear confident, but actually have low self-worth. Arrogance, hubris, or narcissism, for example, are often a clear giveaway that a person has low self-worth. High self-worth leaders derive their sense of validation from within, are constantly positive, naturally joyous and upbeat, always learning, non-critical of others, have a clear purpose, and are courageously living it, and have a high level of self-control and self-discipline. They don't need or abuse substances to feel good. They're focused on serving others rather than serving themselves, and they always act with integrity. A high self-worth leader is willing to be personally accountable, takes feedback as an opportunity to grow rather than as a personal attack, is authentic and willing to be emotionally vulnerable. They're humble, open to new ideas, deeply loving and kind, solution-oriented, and love to create freedom-centered environments where everyone can realize their fullest potential. Low self-worth leaders, however, are controlled by fear, struggle with the imposter syndrome, think they are never good enough, and they think they must be constantly proving themselves, and this dramatically impacts the way they lead. They are much less inclined to be open to building a freedom-centered team or organization where everyone can flourish because freedom feels threatening to them. Leaders with lower self-worth love to micromanage, need to be externally validated through constant achieving, are hot and cold with their kindness towards others, and are overly self-critical and critical of others. They're often negative, indifferent, moody, and self-absorbed. And they hear feedback as a personal attack rather than as an opportunity to grow. Fear-based leaders who struggle with low self-worth thinking often lack self-control. They engage in substance abuse, are emotionally manipulative, defensive, and unforgiving. They aren't willing to take personal responsibility for their actions. They're always self-justifying and making excuses. They tear others down, and they lack authenticity and discipline. They're not interested in bringing out the best in others because they're too focused on what they think others are thinking about them. So the bottom line is this: high self-worth leaders operate in freedom, and low self-worth leaders operate in fear. Your level of self-worth determines the way in which you will lead yourself, your team, and the style of organizational design that you will most readily embrace. Your level of self-worth impacts the way you structure your day, your sense of boundaries, how you interact with others, your level of joy and happiness, the decisions you make, and much more. It determines your effectiveness at leading yourself and others. While it may seem blunt to say, the bottom line is that your team, division, or organization is only as good as your level of self-worth as a leader. After about 25 years of teaching top leaders about freedom-centered leadership all over the world, my team and I began to ask ourselves this key question: why did some CEOs and top leaders get it and others really struggled to build a freedom-centered team or organization, even if intellectually they loved the idea? Well, upon taking a closer look, a clear pattern emerged. The CEOs or top leaders who were building and growing thriving, freedom-centered teams or organizations all had one thing in common. They all had high self-worth. We saw this with CEOs and top leaders of WorldBlu certified freedom-centered organizations, such as WD-40, Menlo Innovations, Wyden, Beetroot, DaVita, Mindvalley, and hundreds more. The CEOs and top leaders, however, who struggled to grasp the concept of freedom-centered leadership and freedom at work, all struggled with low self-worth. Again, freedom-centered leadership is directly correlated with the level of self-worth of the top leader of a team or organization. When you love yourself, you want to create a workplace environment that loves and respects others too, which is an environment based in freedom. When you don't love yourself, you create a workplace environment that doesn't love or respect others, which is an environment based in fear and control, my friends. It's an important correlation between a top leader's level of self-worth and their organization or team's culture, which was illustrated when we were working with a client over a period of several years. This company was a multi-million-dollar manufacturer of equipment, and their leadership team loved the idea of freedom-centered leadership and freedom at work for their company. They came to our live trainings and conferences, and they always left on fire. However, they would go back to their offices and try to implement the ideas we taught them, but they kept hitting roadblocks with their CEO. Their CEO's high self-worth leadership team was growing increasingly frustrated by the subtle and often unconscious things he was doing to undermine the freedom-centered organization they were working so hard to create. Eventually, they convinced their CEO to come to one of our immersive trainings in freedom-centered leadership, and he did. At the training, we talked deeply about self-worth, and the CEO recognized that he had low self-worth, and it was massively impacting the way he was leading the company. He had inherited the company from his father and was still trying to prove to himself that he was good enough to be the CEO now, which led to all kinds of dysfunctional leadership behavior. By the end of our training, he stood up in front of everyone and committed to working on improving his level of self-worth because he recognized that he was unconsciously sabotaging his employees' efforts of building a high-performing, freedom-centered organization due to his low self-worth. After our training, his leadership team went back and started doing even more inner leadership work on themselves through our courses. The CEO, despite his public commitment, however, did not. He continued to wrestle with self-doubt and inner gremlins. His high self-worth leadership team and other top employees grew more and more discontented. They knew what the problem was, his low self-worth, but the CEO had too much pride to do the deep inner work on himself or ask for help. It soon became clear to everyone that they would never be able to truly move the company from fear to freedom because he would keep sabotaging their efforts based on his own insecurities. Eventually, his high self-worth leadership team and other top employees resigned, feeling deeply disappointed. And the CEO then ended up selling the company to a competitor. Again, most leaders don't know how to lead themselves effectively because they don't love themselves. They're dysfunctional lovers, so to speak, and therefore dysfunctional leaders because one simply cannot express more love for another than you have for yourself. If you only have a thimble of love for yourself, you can't express an ocean of love for another. Even worse, if you only have a thimble of love for yourself, you can't accept an ocean of love from another. Gary Ridge, CEO of the WD-40 Company, a WorldBlu certified freedom-centered organization, puts it like this: leadership is not a game for the weak. As leaders, we navigate both calm and rough seas. As with a master mariner, if we have clear sight to the desired destination and we've been thoughtful and deliberate about what assets and resources we need to get to the destination, we have confidence we can get there. But then unexpected rough weather interrupts our journey. This is when we need to dig deep into the favorable opinion of ourselves. This is not arrogance or hubris. It is taking the time to reflect and refresh, to find a place of solace that reminds us that we can sail those rough seas and get our vessel and those that serve on it safely to our destination. Freedom-centered leaders love to build freedom-centered teams because of their belief in themselves and their belief in others. They naturally inspire confidence, loyalty, and a sense of certainty during uncertain and challenging times like what we're in right now. Also, the entire premise of freedom and organizational democracy in the workplace is built on the fundamental idea that each one of us has inherent worth and therefore deserves to have a voice, to have decision-making power, and to be free rather than be ruled over by another. So you simply cannot believe in freedom-centered leadership or freedom at work if you don't believe in each person's inherent worth. And you will never resonate with the premise of the freedom at work model if you don't believe in your own worth or the worth of others. Freedom and low self-worth are completely incompatible. That's why you never see a high self-worth dictator. Low self-worth people thrive in a dictatorial, command and control, fear-based workplace culture. High self-worth people gravitate towards, build, and thrive in freedom-centered, democratic workplaces that respect and honor the worth of each person. As freedom-centered leaders, we want to create environments that help release potential. We are not threatened by other people's success, but instead take joy in it. In fact, at WorldBlu, we have found that we simply cannot teach CEOs and top leaders who have low self-worth and are not willing to work on it how to build a successful freedom-centered organization unless they are willing to work on themselves first. The reason we won't work with low self-worth CEOs or leaders who are unwilling to grow is because building a freedom-centered team or organization is all about giving power to your people. Fear-based leaders who are insecure within will find that freedom and organizational democracy threatens their very sense of significance, position, and power. High self-worth leaders who are naturally secure in themselves are much more open to building a freedom-centered team or organization. In my experience, my team and I working with top leaders in over 65 countries worldwide, we believe there is another global pandemic, and it's one of low self-worth, my friends. Most people struggle with self-worth, which is why I'm so passionate about helping you raise your level of self-awareness about self-worth so that you can keep growing and improving as a leader if you so choose. Now, let's explore a few key questions to help you raise your awareness about your own level of self-worth and the way that you lead. The key here is to be honest, but not too hard on yourself. I want you to answer these questions as we go along. No one will see your answers to these questions unless you choose to share them. I will ask the questions and give you about 1 minute to fill out your answers. Just answer from your gut and don't overthink it, okay? All right, here's the first question. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how would you rate your level of self-worth and why? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how would you rate your level of self-worth and why? I want you to just go with your gut. Please write down a whole number. You don't need to write like 6.5. Just pick a whole number, okay? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how would you rate your level of self-worth and why? And I want you to jot down a few notes about why you feel this way about yourself. You know, I don't want to say words that lead you in the wrong direction. So just why do you feel this way about yourself? So on a scale of 1 to 10, not how much confidence you have, but it's how much you like who you are, you love who you are, you're secure in who you are as a person. That's what we're getting down here. So grab a pen, grab paper, grab your iPhone, grab your computer, whatever you need to do. And I want you to write down your answer to this question. A number, a whole number, and why, and why. Okay, let's go to question number 2. Oh, actually, we're going to say this first. Okay, if you gave yourself an 8 or higher, we consider that the high self-worth zone. But as I said in my previous talk on freedom-centered leadership, let's remember that we are all inherently a perfect 10, whether you're willing to accept it or not. We all have worth. We don't have to earn it. It's inherent to who we are. It comes factory installed. Now, why did you give yourself the score that you did? Let's look at the next question, okay, which is your self-worth internally or externally derived or both? Is your self-worth internally or externally derived or both? So look at what you wrote down for why you gave yourself the number you did. And are those reasons internal or external or both? All right. Most individuals derive their sense of self-worth from external factors. Their title, the quality of their things, the car they drive, where they live, how hot their boyfriend or girlfriend, husband or wife is, how much money they make, etc. You get the idea. I remember one CEO telling me that he was a 6 in self-worth because he hadn't hired a new COO yet. What? I've had leaders tell me all the time that their score is impacted by their body type, how much money they make, what their mothers or fathers thought of them as a kid, what job title they have, the size of the pores on their nose. I've literally had someone tell me this. And how much money they made last month, and a lot more. The problem with all of these reasons for why leaders give themselves the self-worth scores that they do is that they are based on external circumstances, things, or other people's opinions of us. But your worth, your inherent value has absolutely nothing to do with anything external. It is all internal, my friends. Our worth is not determined by other people's opinions of us, how they treat us, how much money we make, our material stuff, how much we do for others, how much money we give to others, how much we volunteer, how many awards we have, or anything else external. The problem with all those things is that it can change in an instant because they are all external things. Your self-worth is not your net worth. Your true worth must be found within. When it comes from within, it is grounded not on the sand that is constantly shifting and changing, but on the rock of knowing who you are. I often have leaders tell me that their sense of self-worth changes depending on the day. Some days it's high and some days it's low. Again, that is deriving your self-worth from external factors, or what the gremlins, as I like to call them, are telling you about yourself. Ultimately, your level of self-worth should not fluctuate. Your self-worth should be high, constant, and come from within, my friends. Now let's look at the next question, which is this. Okay, and there's a lot of words here. I'm going to read it. Question 3. Now look at the number you wrote down for question 1, which was on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate yourself? I want you to think about what would it take to move from where you are to the next number up. So for example, if you gave yourself a 6, what would have to change for you to give yourself a 7? Okay, so if you gave yourself a 6 before, what would have to change for you to give yourself a 7? I want you to really think about this. Just write down your answer. What would have to change? You gave yourself a 3 to go to a 4. If you gave yourself a 9, what would have to change to go to a 10? Gave yourself a 1 to a 2. You get the idea. What would have to change for you to let yourself give yourself a higher score? That is if you're not already at a 10, okay? Okay, so go ahead and write down what you think there. Okay. By identifying what it takes for us to move up just one number, we start to get a much clearer sense of if we are deriving our self-worth from internal or external factors. I remember working with one coaching client named Claire. She had had a very successful career, was happily married, had a beautiful son and daughter at home, and was financially very well off, yet she struggled with her sense of self-worth because it doesn't come from external stuff. When I asked her how she would rate her level of self-worth, she said a 6. Then when I asked her what it would take to move from a 6 to giving herself a 7, and she just stared at me blankly and laughed. She said she had no idea what would have to change for her to give herself, go from a 6 to a 7. As I worked with her, Claire realized how her low level of self-worth was on autopilot. And this is many of us, were just on autopilot about self-worth. She was stuck in a ruminating rut about how she thought about herself. Later, she told me, as I reflected on the number I gave myself for my self-worth, I just realized how arbitrary it was. And that is so often the case, my friends. It's so arbitrary, this number. If it's less than a 10, it's so arbitrary. Claire saw that the only one holding her down was herself. She had the power to embrace her true worth anytime she wanted to. She only had to make the choice. And you can make that choice today too, my friends. So let's look at the next question. What would have to change for you to give yourself a 10 in self-worth? If you're not already giving yourself a 10, take this moment, grab your pen, and really, I want you to think about what would have to change for you to give yourself a 10. What would have to shift? Now remember, self-worth is internal. So what's going to have to shift in your mindset, in your thinking? What's going to have to shift for you to give yourself that 10? Okay, what's going to have to shift? Write that down, please, if you would. Okay. So for some of you, the very thought of giving yourself a 10 in self-worth feels scary, uncomfortable, and even arrogant. But again, remember that a 10 doesn't mean you are perfect and have nothing to work on. A 10 means you understand your inherent value and worth. So what would have to shift to give yourself a 10? I love asking leaders this question because it all comes back to how they think about themselves. They might say things like, I want to get in shape more, eat better, be kinder, be more confident, make more money, and then I can give myself a 10. But as we talk more, they slowly start to realize how conditional their love is for themselves. If I do this, they reason, then I can love myself more. The very question starts to make leaders much more aware of how conditional their love is for themselves and ultimately for others. But high self-worth individuals love themselves unconditionally. They understand that they don't have to earn their worth. It is inherent in each one of us. It's unconditional. And once you realize this, it will be much easier for you to claim the 10 that you inherently are. All right, now let's look at the last question. How would you lead differently if you knew you were a 10? How would you lead differently if you knew you were a 10? stop and think for a moment. If you knew that you were already good enough, that you didn't have to do something that would undermine others to make yourself feel significant, if you knew your place was secure, how would you lead differently if you knew you were a 10? If you knew you were a 10. All right. Now, if you've already given yourself a 10, this is an opportunity to think about how you can still, up your game, as we're all constantly improving. But if you aren't there yet with believing and acting as the 10 that I know we all inherently are, I want you to think for a moment about how you might lead yourself, your team, your company, your community organization, your church, or your family differently if you knew you were a 10 and you knew everyone else was as well. I can feel many of you thinking, wow, I would probably be a lot calmer, listen more, stop having so much fear, let go of the gremlins holding me back, and just go for it. And I bet if you knew you were a 10, you would stop putting up with a lot of BS too. Am I right? Yeah. I firmly believe we are all 10s in our worth. You are already a 10, my friend, whether you know it or not, and whether you are willing to believe it or not. So why not start believing it today? The problem is so many of us have forgotten this fact. We almost learned that we all have inherent and infinite worth, even beyond a 10. And we don't have to earn it, we just get to accept it and express it. And while your sense of self-worth can at times be forgotten, it can never be lost. To know your worth is to know true freedom, and that is why you aren't a freedom-centered leader until you know your inherent worth. Again, for some of you, accepting the 10 that you inherently are can be difficult. Each individual must find their inherent sense of self-worth and the way that makes sense for them. For me, I understand that I am a 10 through my spiritual path, as many leaders do. Matthew Gonnering, CEO of WorldBlu, a WorldBlu certified freedom-centered organization, says he knows he is a 10 because to not believe I am would be an insult to the maker. Nathan Donaldson, CEO of Boost, another WorldBlu certified freedom-centered organization, knows he is a 10, but for a different reason. While he doesn't believe in a higher power per se, he still knows that he has worth. I just know it, he told me. It's also important to know that because we are all inherently 10s, I do not believe there are high self-worth people and low self-worth people per se. I might say that as a shorthanded way of saying it. But the reality is there might be high and low self-worth thinking and behavior, but not people. So it's important to kind of separate that low self-worth thinking and behavior from the core of who that person is, because at the core, we all really do have high self-worth. We just sometimes forget it. When we understand that we all are inherently 10s in our worth, then we can truly change the way we lead our families, teams, organizations, and our world for the better. Think about it. When you love yourself, you don't self-sabotage, you don't undermine a colleague or blast someone who has a different point of view from you. When you love yourself, you don't engage in substance abuse, shoot kids out of school, or hit your wife. When you love yourself, you don't go around attacking others or trolling people on the internet. When you love yourself, you don't engage in unethical behavior, shirk responsibility, or tear others down. When you love yourself, you engage in constructive rather than destructive behavior. I truly believe that almost every problem in our world, from familial to workplace drama to global conflicts and even health epidemics, can be solved when more people rediscover and really stand for their inherent sense of worth. In the process of reflecting upon these questions, I hope you have become more aware of where you are in your level of self-worth and how it may be helping or undermining your effectiveness as a leader. You can also think about the 5 people on your team with whom you work the most, and even the 5 people in your life you engage with the most, and think about where their level of self-worth might be and how it might be impacting their behavior. And my earring just dropped off. And if you have children or young people in your life, I strongly encourage you to think about where their level of self-worth is on a 1 to 10 scale. And this is really important. And if it's anything less than a 10, please think about how you can help the children in your life improve their sense of self-worth. I have 2 nephews and a niece, and I'm constantly talking with them about their level of self-worth and their friends' levels of self-worth too. And I tell them that I won't let them date anyone who has low self-worth or who at least isn't working on it. In summary, remember, you are inherently worthy right now, my friend. You are a perfect 10. Freedom-centered leaders understand this and work to create healthy environments that bring out the worth in each person. I hope you are compassionate with yourself and others as we all work through the challenges of claiming our worth. And I pray we each learn to embrace the inherent fact that we are all 10s in self-worth. Now, go out and live and lead like the perfect 10 that you are today and every day.